Welcome to the Beyond the Reef podcast, where I talk to experts and researchers in the reef aquarium hobby, discussing a broad range of topics from corals and reef biology to water chemistry and equipment. We take a deep dive into our guests' methods, techniques, and top reef keeping tips. My name is Adam Sutherland, and I am the owner-operator of Frag Garage Corals, based out of British Columbia, Canada. This podcast is now brought to you by Fauna Marine. I was hesitant to bring on any sponsors, but since I use so many Fauna Marine products, I was really happy to have them collaborate with me. And also, I am now a certified ICP consultant, so if you send in a laboratory ICP test, you can select me as an advisor. Hey folks, welcome back for another episode of Beyond the Reef. So I've had a little bit of a hiatus, maybe a little bit of a reefing rut, but I'm going to get back in the regular of having these episodes coming out often, and I'm really excited for this episode. I've been wanting to talk to Thein from Tidal Gardens for maybe since the beginning of planning this podcast. He's been on my list, so it was great to lock him down. And today's subject is building for long-term success. Just some of the things, some of the mistakes, things you can avoid to sort of make sure that your system runs smoothly year after year in the long term. And Thein has just done some really impressive things in his facility, which, you know, not all are going to be applicable to a reef aquarium, but we're going to try to keep it, you know, down to earth to the hobbyist level as much as possible. So as per usual, I ask that you hit subscribe, hit like, comment in the comments, let us know what you think. And if anyone is looking for any consultations for any issues with their systems or wants to go over an ICP, you can go to my Patreon at patreon.com/beyondthereefpodcast. And that's a good way to reach me to set up some consultations and one-on-one with me. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoy this conversation with Thein from Tidal Gardens. All right, man. Well, let's just jump in and see where this goes. I've been actually wanting to have you on the podcast since I started selecting guests for it, so it's cool to finally have you on. So thanks for joining me,
Awesome.
man. Yeah.
No worries. No worries.
I've been a fan of your content and your appearances on other podcasts and whatnot for quite a while. So a lot of stuff's made me laugh, and it's always entertaining. So it's cool, man. I thought a good topic for you, because you seem to think of like every possible thing that goes into your systems in your farm would be building for long-term success, you know, with your reef tank. And something I think we probably have to keep in mind when we're talking, because your system is on such a commercial level, that maybe we can bring it back to this sort of hobbyist level as much as possible. Because, you know.
Yeah, that is always the tricky thing, is just to make it relatable.
Yeah. But there's coral farmers that watch this podcast too, so it's all useful stuff. So, yeah. So I kind of thought an interesting way to start it would be to almost start in reverse, and we sort of talk about old tank syndrome, and we kind of work our way back to kind of how we got there, and maybe sort of start by sort of defining old tank syndrome, because it's not really a concrete thing. It's kind of like a term that's thrown around a little bit, but you know, it's kind of just like the inherent problems you start to see with an established reef tank after time. And, you know, were those choices that you made along the way? Was it maintenance that you missed? You know, what are some of the things you could have done to sort of, you know, mitigate that somehow? So I don't know, how would you define old tank syndrome if you had to?
So I always thought that old tank syndrome is when you have a tank set up for a very long time, and you start to have like these systemic issues that are kind of mysterious. And for example, just like creeping nutrient levels, things like nitrate and phosphate, just climbing. And even though your best efforts of controlling your feeding better, upgrading your filtration, all manner of things, trying to reduce that, it just still builds. It's that type of issue kind of, again, just kind of creeps up. And a lot of times I think that just the way that our systems age, they age really gracefully for like a really long time. But then at some point, it just loses that ability to process everything that's going on in your reef.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like a saturation point for certain things. I mean, something I think about is your surfaces in your live rock may have sort of maximized on the amount of phosphate that can be precipitated into the rock. And, you know, some of the porosity of the rock sort of starts to lose its ability to, you know, manage some of that. Yeah.
Yeah, we're actually sort of struggling with that a little bit right now because we're currently rebuilding the systems in our greenhouse. And it's wonderful because we're able to kind of get that fresh restart. And we went as far as acid bathing, like some of the older rock that we had used previously. And a lot of the stuff we had cleaned out really, really thoroughly, gave it a pretty heavy soak in muriatic acid.
Hmm.
And one would think that in a brand new system, you would kind of not experience a lot of these problems. But immediately our phosphate jumped up to like zero point 0.4.
Mm.
And there's nothing going on in that tank. It's just rock. There's barely any feeding going on. There's no fish. There's a few dozen corals. Like there's
Hmm.
just nothing going on. And we're heavily filtering with like filter rollers, very cleaned out skimmer, all the tanks and the sump crystal clear.
Hmm.
It's coming from the rock.
Yeah.
Long story short, and despite our best efforts to try to process our rock to kind of alleviate some of that, high nitrate, high phosphate right away.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting because I never really thought about resetting rock before. And obviously you tried it. Maybe it doesn't work that well. I don't know.
No, not so much. But I don't really know if there's a good way to do that other than you just let it run its course and then you just treat the symptoms of it. So
Hmm.
maybe you run GFO, maybe you do some bacterial something or the other. But yeah, it is tricky to work with like older substrate like that.
Hmm. Yeah. So I think something I know about your systems is that you kind of have a way to reset them fairly easily if you want to say, completely, reset a system for, as far as like actual clean glass. We're not just talking emptying everything out and, cleaning. Like, would you do resets on systems from time to time?
Um, we do. Unfortunately, it's not possible to do it as well as I would like.
Hmm.
However, it still is quite a bit better than it was in the past for us. I do see a benefit to do that on a commercial scale. It's neither here nor there for me on a hobbyist level, but there are so many problems that can arise when you're trying to do very long-term sustainability in aquaculture.
Hmm.
So our systems, they run for like 10 years, 20 years in some cases. And there's all kinds of issues that really could build up if you just allow regular neglect to happen over the course of years.
Hmm.
So, for example, in breaking down some of our systems out in the greenhouse, our feed lines from the sump to the different farming tanks, they were inch and a half, I believe. And I would say that they were about 90% filled with all kinds of like calcareous
Yeah.
invertebrates,
Yeah.
just solid. It's a miracle that they were flowing water through them at all.
Hmm. Yeah, it's pretty crazy how much of your surfaces will just get covered in biological, material. Yeah.
Yeah, and no one, and people typically don't think that, oh, just because water is flowing through these pipes,
Yeah.
that there's going to be a problem. Turns out there's a pretty big problem if
Yeah.
you're running those things for like 5, 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I wonder if replacing plumbing every so often isn't a bad idea. The question would really be is like, aside from restricting flow, does any of that actually have a negative impact on the system? Because it's still biofilms. It's still, part of the biology of the system.
I think where it could help is if you have this known issue, for example, that you just simply can't get rid of. Like a lot of times, people will struggle with Montapora eating nudibranchs,
Hmm.
and they will take every single Montapora out. They'll dip it like crazy. That doesn't work.
Yeah.
Then you start to just basically take like the smallest DNA sample sized things of Montapora,
Hmm.
cull the rest. You start growing those back out into stuff. One day they have Montapora eating nudibranchs. And a lot of times, like these things can just persist off of your corals in your system somewhere, especially those nudibranchs, and they could just be living in your pipes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they're one of the only pests that really walks around the tank, and isn't only just on the coral. So, yeah, they're definitely a problem. I don't know if you had much experience with. There's a specific type of peppermint shrimp that eats the Montini nudibranchs like crazy. They're the Queckenthali lismata, I think from Jakarta.
So I personally haven't messed with it, and I'm sure that they work great. The only problem is the way that we do a lot of like system-wide maintenance on our systems is not very crustacean friendly.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we love to do is like blast our tanks with industrial grade interceptor.
Yeah.
And like 5x the dosage for red bugs, for example.
I mean the red bugs were sissies compared to the bugs we've got now. I think it's kind of an established standard that it's 5 or 6 times what the red bug recipe was. Yeah.
And then we'll hit that 3 times a week. And yeah. And by the way, that's astronomically expensive to do.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on how you're sourcing it, but it's not a cheap product for sure. Yeah, I mean,
no. But we would nuke all of our shrimp and everything like that. So we try to not do shrimp.
Well, what I do is I have like a little hospital system that just has a crap ton of those shrimp in it. So if I get new corals, they just go in there for a week or something like that. So it's kind of like a quarantine hospital, I guess, that's got workers in it. And they go right to stuff. Yeah, because I mean, then you have a system that's not treated by the interceptor that's,
Yeah.
So, yeah, and they also eat those new acroporiting flatworms, like the sort of purple black little ones that come from Indo, the nastiest ones. You must know.
I'm going to go ahead and knock on wood, but I don't think that we've seen those just yet.
That's lucky because they're probably the most destructive pest I've ever come across. They're really nasty.
So I think that I benefit from not doing a lot of wild coral intake. We don't import directly. And oftentimes, the amount of stuff that we actually bring in for long-term aquaculture, it's shockingly little. Like I would say 10 pieces a month or something like that will actually reach our farm.
Yeah.
So like we don't expose our stuff a lot to newer rivals in that way. So I think that perhaps just by sheer luck, we might have dodged some of the newer pests, but oftentimes it is just a matter of time before something falls through the cracks.
And that is kind of a thing on my list is where you're going to acquire your corals from, and the differences in aquacultured, maricultured, wild corals. I mean, it seems like most of probably I would say the SPS you guys farm are probably like aquaculture multi-generation corals, so you don't have an input of a lot of new.
Yeah, and also we tend to be like very selective when it comes to things like Montapora and Acropora, just because like the next Montapora that we get could be the source of Montapora eating nudibranchs, and all of a sudden our entire collection is at risk.
Yeah.
So is it really worth it to add a Montapora to the collection? Probably not. I'm not super excited about adding some random new Monty that we just don't have.
Yeah.
Acropora is obviously more enticing because there's like so many like highly prized strains, but also again there are flatworm issues that come with many of these things, and that does temper my enthusiasm for that.
Yeah.
So we actually have I would say, as far as like the big coral sellers, I would say that our acro collection is not nearly as robust as some of the others, but that comes down to just our reluctance to introduce just these chronic issues with pests. Yeah.
I mean, one of the problems I think I have with mariculture is it's so hard for these farms they have to get documents through the country to collect new brood stock, which is what they cut all of their stuff from. And some of these farms are still going on the same brood stock that they had, 6 or 8 years ago. And there isn't really an influx of new corals coming in. So like, if you think you're going to get something that's wildly, unique or different or special from a mariculture farm, it's kind of unlikely at this point, because I think a lot of people don't understand that. I think they think there's all this stuff coming in all the time. I might get some banger that nobody's seen. And it's like, I don't think so, unless that's illegal. Like unless it's been illegally collected. But from the owners of some of the farms that I've talked to in Indo, they're very, very careful about that stuff. Like I think they don't really take any chances. You know.
And is that grown in the ocean though, or is it
Yeah.
grown in?
Yeah, so I guess
Okay.
for people listening that don't know, mariculture means that these are sort of coral farms that are set up in a bay or an area that would have maybe not been as populated with coral, and then they're grown on these little ceramic or concrete bases, and then that's a lot of the SPS we see in the hobby, right? Versus
So
wild,
how
which wild would just be fully wild collected piece, which is kind of what we see from Australia.
so if you're culturing in the open ocean, how do you take any precautions?
I think the precautions that can be taken are probably more so in the farm, like or the packing facilities. That being said, I
Okay.
mean, when you've got corals in the ocean, you've got all of those natural predators for the pests, right? Like you've got all these wrasses and fish and
Yeah.
whatever other little things that are going to pick. But that's why we see pests come in from mariculture because and they could have pests in the farm that every time they bring these corals from the ocean, which are more or less clean, all of a sudden they're exposed to this system that's just had this overturn of constant corals coming in and out. So there's always a big risk there.
Yeah. I also know that oftentimes stuff that is a pest in our aquariums isn't a pest in the wild.
Hmm.
Like it is part of just a bigger biome.
Yeah.
And once you kind of remove it from that biome and into our systems, all of a sudden something might just go hungry
Yeah.
and it's time to start eating coral at that point.
Yeah.
But in the ocean, it can just persist on the corals, and the coral is perfectly healthy
Hmm.
because there's like this more robust, just again biome just going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, but once we get like kind of like laboratory clean with everything, all of a sudden this thing that was not a problem is suddenly a
Yeah.
coral
Yeah.
pest.
It's unchecked. Yeah. And it's yeah, I mean it's hard to manage, but I mean I think, sourcing your corals is a big thing. Like knowing, like I do see a lot of people and, not to knock people that are more into cutting up mariculture, but I think people need to be really careful, that they've had those corals for 6 months to a year, and that they're holding their color, like they're actually growing, they're not just a cut up coral, like because not all corals
Yeah.
that you import, until you start encrusting them or you can frag them and you see an actual, axial coralite tip starting to shoot out from where you cut it, a week or so later, there's no guarantee that that coral is going to actually take to our, home aquarium conditions.
Yeah, and unfortunately for beginning hobbyists, they can't really differentiate very easily between something that looks aquacultured and something that looks freshly imported.
Hmm.
Oftentimes it's like they see some absolutely stunning, ridiculously like pastel colored Easter egg
Hmm.
type coral, or yeah, and they're like, "Oh, this is incredible. I've never seen anything like this. That's what I want." And it's like, no, that's really not what you want. That thing just showed up from the ocean,
Yeah.
and you are lucky if it survives. And if it survives, it will definitely not be that color for very long.
Yeah, yeah. It's like Millipora are, I think, especially known for that kind of silvery, metallic kind of shimmer that they have,
Hmm.
and it's gonna sort of. I like to say they sort of reinvent themselves for your reef tank. They kind of, find their new look or whatever, and I think there's some people. I talked to Leonardo's Reef about this a little bit, and he said he's had good success bringing some of those colors back. With some of his milliporas, but it's taken a lot. Like for some of them, he said it took him a couple of years to actually get that color back. So, it's kind of like almost like here's the potential. Good luck. See if you can keep it up.
That is a tricky problem, isn't it? And this is something that somebody did ask me at one point about like our systems here, because we go pretty hard on our systems here. And just in terms of capital investment and like the choice of the different devices and the choice of methodologies. And at some point, did you just come up with something that simply cannot be replicated by your customer base and you're like guaranteed gonna disappoint them for the simple fact that like you don't do this insanely esoteric method just to like bring out peak coloration? sorry, you shouldn't have bought that coral from me, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Um, I mean, but at some point, I also do think that the sort of stuff that you have to do for long-term farming is going to be different than a lot of hobbyists because like
Hmm.
the fact of the matter is like hobbyists don't stick around for more than like 2-3 years on average, and like we can't design our systems trying to match hobbyist results. We have to actually try to like grow these things for like 10, 20 plus years. So there's like this careful balance between trying to like do crazy optimization stuff and also kind of getting it to where a hobbyist might also be successful and see that same level.
Yeah.
It's tricky for us anyways.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think for the hobbyist, though, like, especially if we're sort of talking about corals that maybe have more challenge to keeping the color or the growth, I think maybe the challenge is part of the appeal, though. Like, if you get in a coral from Tidal Gardens and it looks awesome, well, then you've kind of challenged yourself to, keep it up, if not improve upon it, And I think people know what they're I think people know when they buy. I don't think, like, do you get emails, from people a month or two later that said, this coral's brown now, like, and they're kind of mad about it?
I have had people just simply ask the wrong question, like right up front, and I just know that's a giant red flag.
Yeah.
It'll be somebody asking about an acro. It's like, will this keep its color? It's like if you're asking that question, the answer is probably no.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because I have to ask you about 500 questions to answer that question. There's too many,
Right.
too
It's
many
like
things
there's
to
a
know.
really good chance that this
Yeah.
thing is going to change color.
Yeah, it's
And
not
it is
gonna be
going to
good.
be a serious ordeal to try to achieve peak coloration. There's been many talented hobbyists before you that have failed. So is it going to keep its color for you?
Yeah.
Boy, sometimes I'm going to bet on the under
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah. Well, that's as a business owner that sells coral as well, part of the blessing of the hobby, I hate to say it, is that sometimes things die for people and they buy them again. you know, Sometimes it happens. I want people to be successful, but I'm also here for you if you need to buy a coral again. It's fine. I kill corals sometimes too. I have to buy them twice as well. It happens.
Oh, it happens all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And unfortunately, that is part of keeping coral is that so certain things just aren't going to work out. Like even for us, I think that not specifically for SPS, but like zoas, for example. Um, we started this farm back in like 2002. And I was looking back at our photo collection of all the different varieties that we used to have. And there's at least 150 varieties, different color morphs that we used to have physically present here that we no longer do.
Wow.
And nobody has it anywhere in the industry. Like they're just gone. And it might have been any number of issues that happened. Maybe like we sold the last one by accident. Maybe certain ones just didn't do well. Maybe a system crashed. But along the way, there's 150 variants that we no longer have.
Well, I think that
It's
comes
crazy.
down to a little bit of like if you're talking about mariculture, like the selection of corals that were the brood stock, 20 years ago were a little different. The taste was different. Maybe there wasn't as much variety, but like, I don't see any awesome blue millies very often anymore. And back in the day, we had some amazing blue millies, and I don't really see them as often anymore. Maybe you guys have more of the sort of Palmer's blue and stuff like that in the States, but they're kind of hard to come across here.
Interesting. I guess the millies that I'm thinking of are like more purple than blue. Yeah, it's tough to say. And I'm gonna definitely defer to your taste when it comes to acros.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, also, I think we were getting corals from, different locations too. And yeah, the more that it sort of is restricted, I would say the majority is coming from Indo, as far as SPS are concerned. And then obviously Australia. Australia has its trademark SPS, but it's more sort of known for the scolies and the, that kind of stuff, which is awesome in the Acans. Yeah, but actually, can I take us back a little bit to the? I
Sure.
just wanted to talk about resets for a second because I kind of have a little anecdote that I wanted you to weigh in on. So upgraded a system recently. I about 2.5 times the water volume, moved a system with all the coral in it, pretty heavily stocked system, to this bigger system. And I was worried that there would be some kind of cycle on the glass when I did the transfer. And just to be careful, like I actually took established water from my 2 other systems when I did the transfer. So the amount of new water was probably, I don't know, maybe 40% of the water was new water, and the rest of it was, good established water. And I can't talk anymore about how well it went, because like within a week I had coralline growing on the glass. I had no cycle, no color loss, lost no corals. And the thing that I actually noticed was the primary sort of thing that got me thinking about what a reset does is the pH in the system was significantly improved. And not to say the pH had a better peak, it just had a much, much tighter range. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on why.
Specifically about the pH, I wonder if just that the fact that you effectively did a 40% water change kind of opened it up for a little bit better pH control, perhaps. I'm also wondering if just the process of taking all your corals and rock from one system to another also just cleaned it up as well.
Yeah.
But I also do know, as far as like doing that whole transfer of like rock and coral to a new system like that is wonderful.
Yeah.
Like I used to, and by used to I mean until fairly recently, I would start a new system with completely dead everything and just like feed it a little bit of shrimp or whatever. Let that thing just cook for 6 months and then start to introduce corals and stuff. Boy, that's a mistake. Because we had a system here that was about close to 3,000 gallons. And I was doing that, and that entire process, that 6 months, looked terrible. Like, had all kinds of problematic algae, all kinds of nuisance, whatever the heck. And one day I just decided, we have all this extra overgrowth of chalices and whatever else that's growing in the rest of our farm. I'm just going to start throwing them into the new system. And literally overnight, everything cleared up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I simply just waited between 6 months to a year, something like that, completely unnecessarily. Like I should have just thrown all the corals I wanted in there on day 1 and it would have been fine.
Yeah. Yeah. You kickstarted, like there wasn't enough biology happening before, there wasn't enough, diversity of, those biological processes that need to sort of all synergize to make a tank kind of function. And I think that is becoming more of a thing is coral right away, maybe, fish a little bit later, but I think coral right away is a good way to go.
I look at coral as filtration now, like straight up. So when people are worried about introducing a lot of coral all at once, sometimes you find a customer, they're like, well, I got like 30 pieces of coral picked out. I don't want to introduce it all at once. It's like, let me stop you right there. These are not fish. You don't have to slowly introduce a fish load. You can introduce as many corals as you like instantly, and it's going to go pretty well.
Yeah. I mean, maybe put one tester in and make sure it doesn't immediately melt, and then add more.
True. Because occasionally some people, they might have been blind to something really crazy. For example, one of our customers bought a bunch of coral, put it in, they started melting. And he did all these tests, could not figure out exactly what went wrong. It turned out one parameter that he did not test was like, I think, triple the natural seawater level. Which is kind of hard to do, by the way.
Yeah, what was it?
But it was magnesium.
Okay. So magnesium was like 2,500.
4,500.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
I'm surprised you could even like dissolve that much into your, into the water column. But I think, I don't know, obviously magnesium's a pretty like prolific element. So that's wild.
Triple is not great. So I was like, that'll do it. I've
Yeah.
never heard of anybody doing that before, but that'll definitely do it.
Yeah.
So like once we discovered what the issue was. So yeah, so to your point, yeah, perhaps do a tester just in case something is wildly wrong and you just didn't detect it. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it's kind of like I would almost like lend big corals that I don't care about to people starting a new tank because, it's just taking up space in my I've got chalices that are just, these huge dinner plate sizes that they're nothing special. It's like the Raja Rampage or something. I mean, it's a nice coral, but I don't need, 14 inches of it. Like you could lend it to someone, kind of get their system started and then take it back. It's probably not going to die, but not too big of a concern. Yeah. But I mean, I think getting, a piece of an established system is definitely like a big thing for someone, especially if you're a new hobbyist, you're not transferring from another tank, you're sort of starting out. If you can sort of adapt some of that microbiome from a good system, that's probably, a really good idea.
Yeah, it really is going to alleviate a lot of that ugly tank syndrome startup issues. Pretty much all of that will go away if you make a modicum of effort on the biome part.
Yeah.
I was genuinely surprised at like how effective that was.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I do have a little speculation on the pH thing with my reset is I think maybe that system per gallon actually kind of had too many biofilms, in terms of the rock in the sump, every piece of the glass and, pipe and whatever we talked about before, what is the impact of all of those biofilms? Like we always think about that it's sort of the more the merrier really when it comes to, nitrifying bacterias and things like that. But
So you think it was consuming all your oxygen?
I think that there might have been like an impact on the oxygen because,
Hmm.
this is another possibility is that maybe if the corals were slightly shocked, there's a little bit less photosynthesis happening. So maybe the swing was that the corals weren't taking in as much CO2 and not releasing as much CO2 at the end of the day. But you'd almost just think
Hmm.
that it would, I don't know. It doesn't really quite add up for me, but I don't know. If anybody has any speculations, like maybe write in the chat here or something like that. But yeah, hopefully we get
Was
some
it
comments.
was it in the same room?
Yeah, it was in the same room. So,
Okay.
nothing was really different other than the contents of the tank and a bunch of new glass. And it kind of got me thinking, like, should I maybe acid clean my sumps every once in a while as a way to sort of get a bunch of just new, fresh glass as opposed to this glass that is totally covered in biofilms and whatever other matter.
Also, I wonder if just having more water volume, period, because
Hmm.
you said that it was a 2.5x
Yeah,
increase.
yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if it was just the water volume itself
Yeah,
lends itself to like better stability.
yeah, that's possible. And I mean, it's an 8 foot system. That's a lot of open area for air to be exchanged,
Hmm.
and but since then the pH is a little bit lower than when the first week or two, but it's still very good. It's like 8.15 to 8.35 is kind of the range, which it's pretty oceany, so I'm happy with that.
Yeah, pretty
Yeah,
good.
yeah. But speaking of live rock, actually, so do you run live rock in your sumps? Like, is that sort of something you employ on your systems?
No, and I fully think I'm just missing out because we use like primarily Marco Rock,
Hmm.
and we all know the limitations of Marco Rock. It's not very porous. It's probably loaded up with some stuff that leaches out eventually. That's not wonderful. Extremely heavy to work with.
Hmm.
I would love to have all of that be at least real reef rock.
Hmm.
Not the product, but like
Yeah,
actual what used to be live rock.
yeah,
Because like the difference between stuff that was live rock and some of these other different types of rocks that are mined, it's like a night and day difference,
yeah,
worlds of difference, right?
yeah.
I would greatly prefer using that stuff. Now, if you meant like fresh rock from the ocean with like the full microbiome going on there, I haven't done anything like that in literal decades. And that was a conscious choice of I would rather suboptimal substrate versus the risk of introducing something I don't want.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a good calculation or not, but that's the calculation that I went with. I know a lot of like really good facilities now straight up just use live rock, and they do all have their methods of kind of trying to preserve the biome without letting in, goofy pests and predators and stuff. But I personally haven't messed with that.
Yeah. So like what do your sumps look like? Do your sumps have some, media or biological filtration, or is it more that, the corals are doing that?
So they do, but it is some rock, and we've also used some of like of those bricks.
Yeah.
However, I think that we're slowly replacing the bricks for more rock.
Yeah.
Some of the bricks did leach a couple of heavy metals, we think.
Yeah.
Nothing to really be worried about, but they did probably. I mean, it's a ceramic fire thing. You're gonna leach something.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like what you would see in our sumps. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Because I've kind of considered maybe I have too much live rock in my sumps. Like my sumps are just jam packed with it, and I used to always think, the more the merrier. But I'm starting to think maybe I have too much nitrification happening. Maybe this living, breathing sort of rock, and it's almost an organism in itself, is, contributing to more depressants in pH and whatnot. And the other factor is if you pull out the rock, it's another thing you don't have to look at when you're solving problems. It's another thing that you don't have to consider. It's like not having a sand bed. Well, it can't be a problem with the sand bed if you don't have a sand bed.
Yes. That's definitely one of the routes that we kind of went, because like we don't have sand beds typically in any of our systems. We don't have refugiums. We barely have, I mean, the amount of biological material that's in our sumps is fairly limited. So I would say that like the bulk of all of that is really happening in the corals at this point. Is that ideal? Probably not. Probably not. I think that if anything, we're light on that end. However, I think that to run a commercial facility, there are benefits to keeping stuff laboratory clean, even though it might not be optimum biology, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess the other thing that you've probably come across quite a bit is, I think some people get success with a tank and then they set up a new tank and say maybe it's between years that they even had a tank, and they're not able to repeat the success that they had before. And I think that, maybe the amount of systems you've set up and, have you found you've been able to have pretty good consistency with, systems taking off, as you would expect for the most part? I mean, you mentioned that one system that you basically solved it by putting coral in it, but how consistent have you been able to be?
It's never that bad. So I would say that we've been pretty good about it. I think the only times where it would ever be really, really goofy is if we're trying to set up like fresh quarantine systems or something like that. And we throw a bunch of stuff in there and it doesn't cycle quite so well because there's only so many coral you can put into a quarantine, right? But that's only happened like a handful of times. Generally speaking, stuff goes fairly smoothly. Yeah, not bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so how big is the farm, by the way? It's maybe actually I'll get you to send me some videos or photos, but
sure, no
and
worries.
maybe I'll visit one day. That's actually my eventual hope. But how many gallons and actual feet of systems is there?
Okay, so this place is an amoeba. It is constantly changing size and shape.
Yeah.
So it is in the ballpark of between 10 to 15,000 gallons.
Wow.
And yes, I realize that 5,000 gallon delta is a lot.
Yeah.
But like, for example, our greenhouse is shrinking in volume by 2,000 gallons, I think, something like that. So, but it's all in it's all in the service of making stuff more maintainable and serviceable and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a fairly large farm. Like the three largest systems in this new building, they are between 2,500 to 3,000 gallons each. The greenhouse used to be about 5,000 gallons. I think that when we're done doing all that shifting around, it'll be between 2,500 to 3,000 gallons. So yeah, all of it is constantly shifting. And then there's also several independent systems because we found that certain corals really do like being alone. And when we kind of put them into the general population of a 3,000 gallon system, they will struggle mightily. And like micromucilords, for example, for us, we had them in arguably our best system, which is that 3,000 gallon system, giant MRC skimmer, giant MRC filter roller with filter socks, tons of UV, ozone, the works, right? That system is phenomenal. Those micromucilords were on the brink of death. We took those guys out, dipped them, put them alone in a 60-gallon tank, and all of them recovered and are super fluffy. But they are the only strain that's in that tank.
Yeah,
they just did not like the water in that other system.
Yeah, that is an interesting question about coral selection and maybe like I found that with Acans too. Like there's a system that on paper the Acans should love this system, or the micromucas, if you want to use the right terms. They should love this system, and they just don't. And they put them in this other system where the parameters are kind of not as good, and they love that system. But yeah, I wonder. I think chemical warfare is kind of a little bit of a weird thing to look at. It's maybe possible with like some soft corals and stuff like that, but could that be a factor?
Certainly a possibility. That's my working theory. However, it could be as simple as, there was like some weird pest, you dipped it, it's better now.
Yeah.
and then the fact that you put it into another system by itself, it didn't really make that big of a difference, but it did eliminate the risk of recontamination because you now have it in a brand new system.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And you broke the life cycle just by the very fact that you moved it. Yeah. So there are possibilities there. But I think that like those independent satellite tanks is something that I wanted to play more with because we have like these giant interconnected systems, but I am seeing some benefit to having like isolated ones as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, you got to set up a shrimp tank too. I think that's in the books.
Yeah, I just might. Yeah,
it's the best way to go. Want to talk about, if we're good on that, maybe like the biggest liabilities in terms of components of a system that maybe people just need some reminders on, or just kind of, I'd say redundancy is probably a good thing to look at if we talk about maybe return pumps and heaters and stuff like that. Obviously, your redundancy is probably way more insane than the average aquarium, but where would you sort of start with that?
So I think that the way that I would approach that problem is kind of looking at what is super typical and hobby grade. Those components are they are guaranteed to fail.
Yeah.
And they will have catastrophic, consequences when they do. So the two biggest issues, the biggest culprits are going to be pumps and heaters.
Yeah.
Just like you said, pumps and heaters. If your light dies, who the hell cares, right? It's not, unless it falls into the water and fails.
Yeah, that's bad.
But like an aquarium heater is meant to be a $40 piece of equipment because it's almost like there was a business decision that nobody is going to buy a $200 to $500 device for their tank. They will buy a $30 or $40 device to heat their water. That thing is going to be garbage.
Yeah.
100% of the time. So you almost have to assume that going in and do everything in your power to kind of mitigate that risk. Here in a commercial facility, we don't really even use those style heaters at all.
Yeah.
But what we do use is not practical for a home hobbyist. It's going to be its own boiler and
Yeah.
using heat exchangers. So there's no interaction of whatever. And you do the redundancy on that device. But if you're going to be using like aquarium heaters, I would almost budget a yearly replacement, whether that heater needs it or not,
Yeah.
because of how little I trust those things.
Yeah.
Pumps, I think that you can find more reliable pumps, but again, those are moving part devices. They can be tricky. We mitigated that risk by going with commercial grade like Abyss pumps.
Yeah.
Those are insanely expensive,
Mm-hmm.
and they will only make sense for a certain population out there. You know who you are. You don't need me to
Yeah.
convince you.
Yeah.
But I think that there's something to be said about building out your system with the possibility that one of those things might fail. And so perhaps having two return pumps, even though it's going to double your plumbing, that might be a great idea to have a hot spare, essentially, like a running spare. So when one pump goes down, the other one's still going. Great. But also make those pumps easily serviceable because you don't want a failed pump in your system. That thing is probably leaching serious business heavy metals because of the
Yeah.
magnets and stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would say that those are the two most deadly culprits when it comes to like system design at the hobbyist level.
Yeah. Yeah. And something I would add to just as far as like hobby grade heaters is I will only use titanium heaters. I will not mess around with heaters that are glass. I think that's just too risky, and they have to be sealed in a certain way. So, if you don't break the heater from breaking the glass by accident one day, there's always a chance that that rubber seal around the top of the heater is going to creep water, and there's just all kinds of bad things that can happen. So I just use titanium heaters that don't have any control of their own, and I control them with redundant probes on my apex, and then I have another completely different like an Inkbird that also does checks the temp. So I have basically 3 fail safes that can let me know if the temperature is weird in any sort of way. And I think because the titanium heaters are just, it's basically just a titanium, the heater and the cord, and you just plug it in. There's not enough to it for it to really, it's not trying to control temperature. So I think that's probably the best way to go in terms of hobby grade heaters.
So it's been a little while since I went and done this little bit of mental exercise. So I like to do 2 heaters just in case one fails,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I do 2 heaters into a temperature controller that is, let's say we set that guy to about 77 degrees, just for the sake of argument. And then have that controller plugged into something else with a separate temperature monitoring device that is set to probably 80 degrees, just in case it gets stuck on for some reason, and that'll kill power to all of that.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I would approach that.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, my favorite, that last fail-safe control, my absolute favorite device for that are called Ranco controllers. They're not that expensive. Last time I bought one was a while ago, so they might be a little bit more expensive, but they're about $100. And those are industrial quality electronics.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I like to stick with the Ranco controller.
Okay. Yeah, I'll put a link in the notes because I've heard the name, but haven't looked into them too much. Yeah, and I do run 2 heaters, by the way. So it's basically 3 probes, 2 heaters. I think the other reason to maybe, so say you sort of know roughly how much wattage of heater you need for the system. I would rather run, 2 300-watt heaters than 1 600-watt just because of the draw as well. Because you have to think about the draw on each outlet, and how many amps you're using.
Yes, and if you have a GFCI, which you should, sometimes those can get squirrely.
Yeah.
And having like a quick draw from a 600 or 800-watt device is enough to just send that thing tripping.
Yeah, especially if it's turning on and off multiple times a day, depending on what else is on at the same time too. So, yeah. Definitely things to consider. Okay, another liability, but also question for you is UV. And, I know UV has its risks because if it, for some reason, is dry and you turn it on, the bulb can crack. Like, do you use UV for any reason on your coral systems?
I think we use it on just about all of our systems.
Yeah.
And we do have the risk that you just described, which is a worry because we do pump water into it. And so if that pump stops, it's going to drain that thing, right?
Hmm.
That's not great. The really fancy implementation is we have a custom sump that has integrated UV in it, and it is in a chamber that will never be without water. So if the power fails there, well, I mean power meaning the
Yeah.
pump fails,
Yeah.
and the lights stay on, it will heat up that little
Yeah.
container of water in the sump, but it will not just melt down because it's just exposed to air. I think that would be like the ultimate implementation of it, but all of our other stuff, yes, in fact, it does carry that risk.
Yeah.
And we do use UV just about everywhere we can.
And what's your main reason for using UV?
Couple of reasons. So I'm less concerned about like fish pathogens, but I want to just kind of like nuke stuff generally in the water, a little bit for water clarity. But the other benefit of UV is that we run ozone. And a wonderful way of breaking down residual ozone is UV.
Okay.
Like it really wants to, yeah, basically if you run any kind of like ozonated water through UV, that UV is going to break every single one of those bonds. Like boom, it really wants to break out, and UV does a wonderful job of that. So our skimmers, they are professional skimmers. They do a pretty good job of, I guess, of like that contact time where residual ozone isn't necessarily that bad, but just in case the output of that skimmer is being drawn into a UV system.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. I have a UV. I've used it at times and then turned it off, and I'm not decided yet on whether it has like a positive impact on my system. So I'd rather just keep it turned off just in case anything ever happens with it. That being said, installing, so if someone's using an Aqua UV, yeah, you do have to consider that if that pump fails that's feeding it, that it will, like you say, it will just stay filled with water as opposed to completely draining. And some people install them wrong. So if they have the nozzles angled down, obviously the water is going to drop out. So you have to have it sitting so that it can just at least sit full of water. So it's not hard to do.
Yeah.
You lose probably a little bit of head pressure from installing it that way is the only thing.
It's an interesting question as to like how important is it given the risks.
Yeah.
And it's also just more stuff. And sometimes it's always enticing to go with more technology because you think you're trying to do stuff better.
Yeah.
And sometimes like maybe it's just not better.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's entirely possible.
Yeah.
And sometimes more is just more.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to say what the impact is on the biome of the tank too, or is it at the flow rate that you're running at? Is it killing some of your good pelagic bacteria, or is it sort of managing some of the bad stuff? I mean, these are probably more questions for Eli at Aquabiomics, but I do wonder about that. And I think that, you can probably tell overall when a system has a pretty good, microbiome as far as just looking at your corals. So if I'm at that point, I'm not going to just one day decide, yeah, maybe I'll try UV again and see if the tank gets better. It's like, I think I should probably just leave it alone, let it do its thing.
If your tank is doing really well without it, I'd be okay just leaving it off entirely.
Yeah.
Do you do this in your systems where 99% of all your corals are doing great, a couple of them are doing really miserably, and you immediately want to tinker with stuff to try to bring those guys back from the brink?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we all do that, and it's I try to make little decisions and sort of slowly move something in a direction. And the problem is that, like we know, nothing good happens fast. So, how do you really quantify like what you did? And like, unless you clearly see those corals you're trying to save change or improve, but I would say the majority of the time they get worse no matter what you do,
That's fair. It is such a risk because like I said, 99% of all the corals are doing great.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just have to take that win and stop.
Yeah.
It's sometimes it's the pursuit of getting to that 100% that could be like really costly.
Yeah. Well, and something I think to also consider about a struggling coral is that I think there's a point with certain corals where the sort of biological processes in the coral are not firing properly. So no matter what you do, essentially that coral is stunted in a way that it will never recover. So you kind of have to consider, has it gotten to that point? Because there is, I think, a point of no return, especially for SPS. I think maybe for LPS and softies, maybe not zoas. I think when zoas start to go, they're usually they're usually going to melt. But I think that you kind of have to know sometimes when to just kind of call it and just if it gets better from here, cool. But otherwise, I'm just gonna let it run its course. And sometimes they do improve without anything. You never know.
Yeah. We always want to be of the mindset of we can save everything. It doesn't always work out.
Yeah, yeah. Well, actually, a question I often ask my guests is there a specific thing that you tried at some point, say to save a coral or to make a sort of specific improvement you were looking for that you can really attribute to that change that you made?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was trace element addition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was big. This because we do try to do a bunch of different improvements. So, like you said, it is tough to pinpoint. Oh, that was the cause, in fact, of this other thing that I'm observing.
Mm-hmm.
In this particular case, it was night and day difference on certain corals that were literally locked up growth-wise for years. Years. And we had gone another like 18 months of basically the same methodology. That coral still didn't grow. We tried to do this trace element thing because several of our traces came back from ICP as basically bottomed out. And so once we made the proactive effort just to get those values off of zero, those specific corals didn't just kind of start growing. They exploded. It went from no growth after, let's say, 4 years. It was still a 3-inch colony to 10 inches in like 2 months.
Wow.
It's like, okay, trace elements is a real thing.
Yeah. So maybe dig into that a little bit. So what trace element system and ICP are you using? And are you doing it on all your systems or just, certain ones? I don't know how many actual individual systems you have, but
I think we send out on average like 8 to 10 ICPs a month.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes we're testing our water containers. Sometimes we're double tapping just to like see if this ICP's lies match up with its other lies, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So what ICP do we use? Right this second, sitting on the shelf, we have Reef Labs and we have Fauna Marine. Fauna Marin. In the past, we have also used ATI, I think. We've also used what's the other ones?
Oceamo.
We've used a bunch. Not Oceamo. We haven't used them.
Is there Triton? Is that
Triton?
Yeah.
Yeah, we use Triton.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've kind of like dibble-dabbled, and I have no way to really evaluate the quality of ICP results. Like, I can't say that, oh, so-and-so's ICP is just better than another person's. So we just take everything with a grain of salt. But I can kind of assume that if I'm getting a 0 reading, it's probably fairly close to 0 and I need to do something about that.
Yeah, it's probably low. I mean, it depends. If you're on ICP OES, then, the detection range isn't as detailed. So, but so you might get a 0, but then if you send off an MS, you might get a number, some kind of number that you like or don't like.
Yeah. And these machines are so touchy that like calibration is super important. Just operator error is dialed up to 9,000. If something
Yeah.
is done improperly,
Yeah.
it's going to go crazy. So again, grain of salt. And again, that's why we also double tap, right? So sometimes we have like set A, for example. We're sending out 2 set A samples
Hmm.
in this batch. Occasionally we do that. Um, but what trace elements? I mean, like, which ones weren't we low on? Like, there's probably a dozen that could have been problematic. So we don't necessarily try to chase them into a specific range, but getting them off of zero, we've realized that has been hyper effective for us.
Yeah. Yeah. So definitely it's that whole some is better than nothing, you know. If you're getting something, then you know it's available to some degree.
Or even if it is still reading extraordinarily low, if I know that we're actively dosing it, I'm okay with that even.
Yeah.
Because perhaps, towards the end of the month when we're sending in the sample, perhaps it is low again, but the entire month it was being consumed. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, yeah. And also, you know, a number that isn't zero is at least it's a data point. A zero isn't really a data point. It's zero. So once you start getting a reading, you have something to sort of gauge on by the time you do the next one, which is, you know, gives you a way to sort of learn what's going on, I guess.
Yeah. One thing that we started to do recently, I think that this might have been a Chris Meckley idea or something, or I don't know where he might have gotten it from, but we started to do trace elements, like basically trace element batches that we make once a month. And we slowly dose that over the course of the month. So we'll make like a 5-gallon bucket of water, of RO. And then for that particular system, we will go off of like whatever that ICP was, to add a specific formulation just for that system, and then dose it for the course of 30 days. And then that'll be in time for the next ICP results. And then we'll tweak again.
Yeah.
So that has been a major saver in terms of just workload and attention.
Yeah, because you can't be doing sort of like individual elements on every tank every single day. You gotta average it out, right? So has that worked pretty well for you? Like you haven't overshot anything too much? Like
so far so good.
Yeah.
And if we're gonna miss, I'd rather miss low.
Yeah.
The thing I was always worried about was would these trace elements interact with one another and precipitate out or do something weird there? But so far, it's been okay. But then again, it's like every month we do have the opportunity to kind of like rectify some of these things. But I think that the peristaltic pump has been one of like the revelations of this industry in the past few years.
Definitely.
Like we use them a lot for a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah, that's big for sure. Actually, this is kind of a funny thing I saw recently, not a reef related thing, but it was like a little interesting sort of chemistry experiment thing I think it was on Instagram, and it was just like a droplet of, I think, water or some kind of, I don't know, way for these elements to meet, and they put on either side 2 different interacting elements, and they fire up in all these crazy colors on each of these different experiments. And it was really neat. And it kind of got me thinking about how corals are actually synthesizing colors using some of these trace elements. I wonder if some of those, pigmentations are happening on that inorganic chemistry level. I don't know. I'll see if I can find a link to the thing, and I'll put it in the. I'll try to.
I know exactly what you're seeing.
You saw that? It's pretty trippy.
Yeah, I saw the video. Yeah, it's basically a chemistry experiment.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And
so
it drops the little crystals and the
Yeah, and it's like crazy dramatic, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. And I wonder how much corals are doing some of that chemistry, to generate some of the colors, and how dependent is that on trace element inputs from the dosing that we do, because those colors are coming from somewhere, right?
Yeah. No, I wish I had an answer for you.
Yeah,
I was not the best chemist in the whole wide world.
No, nor was I think I dropped out of chemistry, but I appreciate it. Just I don't need to know the details. It's fine.
Organic chemistry is why I wasn't a medical doctor, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah Yeah. So let's see if there's any other things that we can sort of go over that are maybe,
Sure.
I don't know, applicable from your farm. Because everything's so big. I saw a picture, I think, of like last week of your heating system, and I was like, oh man. And like it looks like an engineering company, so that does some kind of hardcore industrial engineering, not a reef farm, but
Let's see. I'm looking at the list
Yeah,
here.
we actually did a good job of sort of jumping between some of these notes without feeling too clinical, so it's kind of nice.
Yeah, I kind of do like the more organic discussion.
hmm
Um,
Oh, we could talk about major element dosing sources because I actually don't know
yeah,
what
yeah,
you
let's
use
do
in
that.
that department. So, yeah, sort of between calcium reactors, 2-part, 1-part calc, like those are kind of I guess, our main options. What are you using in the farm, and kind of why would you land on that?
I use all of it.
Yeah, all of it.
So
Okay.
I use all of them. Okay, so I guess like starting off, we do some water changes, and that to some degree is going to replenish those macro elements, right? Uh, Obviously, that is not going to keep up with demand. So we started to do Kalkwasser, and again, peristaltic pump, best trend in the world.
hmm
We make calc about 20 gallons at a time per system, and that lasts us roughly a week. And so what we do is we have like a freshly made thing of calc and then a backup reservoir. And so like when it comes time to do that swap over, we just swap the lid to the next one and then
hmm
we take that one away to clean it and restart another batch of calc, right? So we do big peristaltic pump dosages of Kalkwasser. And then we run calcium reactors. There's like some debate as to like whether or not calcium reactors are that good. I personally like them quite a lot because it gives us the opportunity to fix. So first off, it's a very gentle way to add
Yeah, because
calcium
it's so
and alkalinity.
constant. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super constant. You might have a pH dip if you're down in your basement or something like that. Our buildings tend to be extremely well ventilated, so we don't have a pH dip. But recently we've had dipping magnesium. Very strange. And so I think like a good 30% of our calcium reactors are now remag.
hmm
And that's helped out a lot, kind of like stabilizing our magnesium consumption. Now, if we are still low in something, calcium or alkalinity after the fact, uh, now we will take a look at doing like a 1-part or a 2-part dose, also on a peristaltic pump to try
Yeah.
to like rectify those numbers. The nice thing about having it kind of decentralized, because it's like 4 different methodologies right there,
Yeah.
is at any given time, something might not be working out. Like running Kalkwasser through a peristaltic pump, those lines do get clogged every now
Yeah,
and again,
definitely.
and you just might not be doing calc for the last 3 days.
hmm
It's like you look in that bucket and it hasn't really gone down. It's like, uh-oh, let's fix that. Um, our calcium reactors are going to be down because we're going to be rebuilding them to a different model in a few weeks. So there might be like several days where a certain system doesn't have a calcium reactor running. So, but when you kind of like spread it out over the, 4 different technologies, it's not as big of a dip as to be kind of like saying, I only do 2-part and then something goes wrong.
Yeah.
So there's kind of like a built-in redundancy there, even though they're all approaching the problem
Yeah,
differently.
I know what you mean. I mean, it's redundancy, but it's also more complicated. I mean, I was running calcium reactor and 2-part on my main SPS system, and recently
Hmm.
I just experimentally decided I'm going to turn off the calc and the calcium reactor and just try 2-part. And
Hmm.
hardly anything changed, to be honest. I mean, hardly
Well,
anything.
if the levels are good, the levels are good. Doesn't
Yeah.
really matter how you got there exactly,
Yeah,
right?
I think my concern was actually that I was going to have a dip in phosphates from not breaking down calcium reactor media. But the other side of that is that by not dosing calc, your calc isn't precipitating phosphates. So possibly, actually, I think what I ended up with was slightly higher phosphate. So kind of backfired on
Oh,
me on what
interesting.
I thought I would see. But it could be other factors. I think the system was moving in that direction anyways in terms of phosphate. But yeah, okay, so you're using all of them, but I'm assuming not all of them on every system. There must be some systems that are just, are there some that are just on calc or calc and calcium reactor or?
So on smaller systems, we would just use either calc or two-part.
Mhm.
Because I think at that point, like on a small system, I don't know if like a calcium reactor is a great idea.
Yeah.
Like just the sizing of calcium reactors, like if you guys look online and you just pick out the smallest calcium reactor model, it'll be like good for 250 gallons,
Yeah.
it's like that sort of thing.
Yeah.
There's not really like a mini version of that for like a 50-gallon tank.
Yeah. That's true. And also, like, say if it's just like a softy system or something, the consumption is not going to be massive anyways. So you're better to just keep it to
Right.
something like two-part. So as far as the
Yeah.
calc, what sort of concentration, like what's your method for calc exactly? Are you kind of on the Meckley concentration or more of a saturated?
Uh, okay, so I'm out of the loop on this.
Yeah.
Uh, so, I mean, we do have like a recipe on like how much we put in for 20 gallons.
Yeah.
I think that once you get it to that precipitation point, you're good, right? Like that
Yeah.
at that point you have calc. Um, what am I missing?
Yeah, well, I think like when I was using calc, I was sort of going on the Meckley kind of came up with the I think 6 or 6.5 grams per gallon, which is kind of funny because they're two different systems as far as measurement, but you know what I mean. So it's like 6 grams per gallon seems to be the point where calc sort of saturates, but does not leave a lot of residual calc in the bottom of the tub. So you probably are somewhere in that range, I would imagine.
Perhaps because we do have like a healthy layer that does form.
Yeah.
So like a good amount of that does precipitate. And then we rinse that out completely every single time we make a new thing.
Yeah.
Because I think that like when calc is precipitating out, some other goofiness out with it, which is kind of what you want.
Yeah, that's possible. Yeah, if well, I don't know if it's precipitating in. Well, maybe it is because it's had some oxygen exposure, I suppose. I mean, we can seal our vessels that it's in as well as possible, but there'll be some. I think part of it is that just some of it doesn't dissolve, but the question is why didn't some of it dissolve? Is it impurities? I don't know. I mean, you guys probably, well, I guess like for your commercial level, you also are really considering cost when you're doing things in large quantities. So like, what have you sort of found to be the cheapest system? It must be calc or calcium reactors, I would think.
It's one of those two, right?
Yeah.
Because like to run a calcium reactor, like all of the upfront costs of a calcium reactor, those are not fun. But the daily use of a calcium reactor is ungodly cheap, right? Like you fill up the media once, twice, 3 times tops a year.
Yeah.
CO2 is cheap, like really cheap. And the newer designs of it, like the older design calcium reactors, I think waste about 50% of the CO2 eventually. Mm-hmm. The newer designed ones waste like 10% of the CO2.
Yeah, the recirculation is really good. Yeah.
Yeah, so now all of a sudden my CO2 consumption goes, you're talking like $20 a year for CO2.
Yeah.
That's nothing, right?
Yeah, and then the media is like, I don't know. I imagine are you using like coral skeletons or like a finer grade media?
We're using the two little fishy stuff currently.
Reborn.
So that's
Reborn.
Yeah, Reborn and then Remag as well.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's good stuff. Okay, well, it's cool. I like that you're using multiple methods. I still believe in all of them. Like, I see the pros and cons to all of them. But I think, coming back to the sort of average hobbyist, like, I think starting a tank, if someone's newer or doesn't have a massive amount of growth, I think 2 parts probably going to be the way to go. I don't have enough experience with 1 part. I think it works for some people, but I think like, 2-part ESV or Fauna Marine or whatever, there are great products out there that you're not going to just like whale through for a while.
Yeah, and also for like a beginning hobbyist, when in doubt, just do a water change.
Yeah.
Like if you just don't know, a water change is going to fix a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes, even if you were able to figure out what's going on that might not be perfect, the answer might already have just been do a water change.
Yeah.
So if you're in the diagnostic mode, go ahead and just mix in that water change now and just see if it gets better. Like
Yeah.
there's a large chance that it just might.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, and actually speaking of water changes, what is your sort of, do you guys have a strict schedule when it comes to water changes and volume and whatnot?
We do not. At certain times, we do. Yes and no, I guess. So we always have a constant state of water leaving this facility in the form of boxes going out of here in UPS. Okay. And it is a significant volume of water. So there's like no way we would ever be like, oh, we are a zero water change house, right? Impossible. Having said that, we also do like some like routine maintenance as far as like siphoning and stuff.
Yeah.
Probably more aggressively than most people for the simple fact that we are trying to keep a more laboratory clean environment for problem solving purposes if something does arise. So there's that also going out. And then on top of that, occasionally, if we're seeing some goofiness where we want to do a larger scale water change, we will then, put that on the maintenance calendar and do it. But that's not exactly routine. But I've noticed sometimes there is a big benefit to doing it. So every now and again, we're like, maybe we should do that more often. And then we run out of salt. And we're like, boy, we use a lot of salt. Maybe we need to cut back on that. So we go back and forth on that. We use reef crystals here.
Yeah.
And I think the general consensus is it's okay. Like
Yeah.
it's not a very good salt. It is not the worst salt ever made. The reason why we use it is readily available when we need it. And it is really cheap for us.
Yeah.
Having said that, because Tidal Gardens is a pretty established brand. And for whatever reason, salt manufacturers that make no money on salt, it's like the zeroest of zero margin products.
Yeah, it's like gasoline, right? Like have you ever seen the graph of how much profit is made on gasoline? It's basically like the gasoline of the reef hobby.
But there's a lot of salt manufacturers that desperately want to be the salt of Tidal Gardens. Okay.
Yeah.
And I am sure that their salt, I mean, having never used their salt before, I am sure all of them are probably better than reef crystals. But I keep on going back to that signature worry that I need this to be available when I need it. And sometimes the stuff coming out of Germany involves coming from Germany.
Yeah.
That gives me a little bit of anxiety. You know?
Yeah. And that's a little bit back to the thing that you said about, how much do you do in your farm that is repeatable for the coral or for the customer to sort of be able to keep up the color of that coral or whatever. I mean, you're using a salt that everybody can access. It's easy to buy. It's easy to get. We didn't talk about lights, but, I think that's a thing I consider a little bit too. Like I'm using radions and pretty modern lighting. I still have, love in my heart for metal halides, but, I'm using radions mostly because I think they are really well built lights in terms of, longevity and whatnot. But I think because they're out there a lot of people are using them. So, they can ask me for my radion schedule. I can send it to them, But so making
they've
things
done a good
applicable.
job becoming like the de facto like the high end standard, right?
Yeah.
It's like a common language.
There's gonna be some threshold point here where just people are like, nope, I mean, I think it's already there, but I think if we got maybe these tariffs coming up between Canada and the U.S. and if radions go up another 25%, I don't think anybody's buying them.
Because that would be what, like $1,200 per light retail or something.
Yeah, I think they're like the XR30s are like 14 or something Canadian, so they'd be upwards of 2K. Like it would just be nuts. So
okay,
yeah.
I love me some radions. That's too much.
Yeah.
It's just too much. Because okay, here's the thing. Like we use hundreds of radions here. Okay, so radion power user, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of lights work.
Yeah.
Like a lot of lights are going to be just fine. Is lighting meaningful? Absolutely. But I think that we're at that stage where so many inexpensive brands will get you 90% of the way there. Like, unless you can articulate some insane reason why you need a Radeon, you probably don't need a Radeon.
Yeah.
You'll be fine. You'll be fine. Like, in our greenhouse, we're using like $125 Vipar Spectras alongside our Radeons. Like, sometimes lighting is just going to be good enough.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So actually, the greenhouse. So the greenhouse it gets obviously natural light, and then you also do you supplement. Are there parts of it that get natural light? Like, what's the?
Okay,
I haven't
so
seen
the
photos
greenhouse
of
is
it
a
in a
funny
while.
story.
So yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, yeah, no, the greenhouse is a funny story because year after year, it is less of a greenhouse.
Yeah,
Because like the idea 20 years ago was that it's like, oh, you know what? I'm going to use the perfect light on the perfect timer, the sun,
yeah, yeah,
And that was also back in the day when the prevailing technology was metal halide, was VHO, fluorescence. And you could do like a cost calculation of like the amount of electricity that you're going to be burning and with bulb replacements and everything like that. A greenhouse is going to make a lot of sense to eliminate all of that, right?
hmm
Problem is, I live in Ohio. There's a huge difference in light between the summer and the winter. The photo period is cut in half in the winter. Intensity is all over the place. So something like Aquapora, you're not going to be able to keep simply because it is going to be brown 9 months out of the year.
Yeah,
It's sellable for 3 months out of the year. That's not a product, right?
yeah,
So eventually, over the years, we started to go with more and more and more artificial light just to get that consistency. And then it was like the more that we can block out the sun, the better the tanks do.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, so over the years, like there's now like floating canopies over the tanks that that block out a lot of light. I've painted the entire greenhouse, so it dropped the temperature 20 degrees in the summer. That was amazing. I should have
Wow,
done that earlier.
wow, yeah. So
So
now it's
yeah,
just a building
it's
called the
bare.
greenhouse. You guys call it the greenhouse, but it's
Exactly.
not really a greenhouse.
It's called a greenhouse because we have security cameras, and the security cameras have like that infrared night vision.
hmm
It is a night vision during the middle of the day with the lights on. So clearly, there's not a whole lot of like sun activity happening
Yeah,
in the greenhouse.
yeah. It's a cool thought, though. I mean, yeah, like I'm in the south of Canada, but I'm pretty north in terms of, variations in seasons and stuff. So it's not really an option here. But I've also heard that, even if you have a really good, like outdoor setup to grow coral in Florida or something like that, the corals don't get as good a color as they do under our, aquarium lighting.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yes and no.
Yeah.
So I've seen a lot of systems where, yeah, their entire acro collection's brown. Totally, right? But maybe it is just because even if you're in Florida, it's not like tropical enough, which sounds crazy,
hmm
but like, because when I went to Hawaii at the Waikiki Aquarium, they have some outdoor displays, one of which they actually call a coral farm. And I swear, those corals looked like lightsaber glowingly bright corals
Mm.
in broad daylight, probably getting like 2 to 3,000 par.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean like glowing blue
Yeah.
in at noon. So yeah, who knows?
So did this actually, I'm curious because I mean, in terms of corals in Hawaii, it's mostly sort of Porites, Poecilophora, stuff like that. But
A lot of that,
was this
yeah.
a system that had imported corals from other parts of the world? Because I don't think they can bring coral into Hawaii from, say, Indonesia or Australia. But maybe
No, my guess is that was local
okay,
because there is Acropora out there.
yeah,
I mean,
maybe
I've
it's
seen
just like maybe
plenty.
you just don't really see it. Like I as far as I understand, most of the coral you see, at least in the tidal areas, is going to be the species I mentioned. But
I agree.
yeah,
I
yeah,
agree with that.
yeah. Okay, that's
But
cool.
I've totally seen like just like individual colonies of acros diving and stuff.
Yeah.
But no, to your point, absolutely true. Lots of Porites, like Porites as
hmm
far as the eye can see.
Yeah.
Lots of Poecilophora. Yeah. Yeah, a little bit of everything though.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
cool. I should check that out sometime. Okay, just I guess we'll do the rapid fire questions at the end if you want, if that's cool. It's kind of
Sure.
fun. It tends to not be rapid, but whatever. There's no rules. So, I just wanted to
Sure.
talk about managing CO2 and CO2 inputs and stuff because you probably thought about that quite a bit in your farm, as far as air exchange. It's something I think I need
Yeah.
to start considering. How did you sort of approach this in terms of,
I
air
just brute
exchange?
forced it because like what I should have done was call in the HVAC professionals from day one and come up with like a comprehensive design thing, like somebody responsible and talk to an architect or whatever, right? That didn't happen. So I just made it up as I went. And so I kind of have like this Frankenstein monster of different types of air extraction through just exhaust vents. So I think not including bathrooms, there are six exhaust fans constantly running here. And then on top of that, we have four HRVs,
Hmm.
which are air exchangers that kind of regulate temperature to some degree.
Yeah.
And that did a really good job of, yeah, just basically keeping this place fresh air all the time.
Yeah, yeah, okay. And did you notice a pretty big like was this part of the facility set up with that initially, or is this something you added on later on? I'm just curious how much of a difference it would have made.
Oh, that was a day one thing, but it was
Yeah,
day one for the dumbest reason.
yeah,
It was day one because I didn't know if we would need air conditioning in this building.
hmm,
Turns out I did.
yeah, yeah,
But so I was thinking like if I was exchanging enough air, if I was extracting enough air, would it be okay? And this building is so well insulated that basically all the heat that I generate from pumps, from equipment, from lights and everything like that stays and I have to deal with directly. And yeah, that meant that down the road I would need air conditioning. And eventually, through like different, like multiple phases of iterative phases, we ended up with two air conditioners, one of which is basically a backup for the other one in case the load gets too high or if for some reason that it needed a repair.
yeah,
But yeah, but all the other stuff, all that other gas exchange was really with the hope that I didn't need an air conditioner.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, and I guess the HRV is bringing in new air from outside, but it's a heat recovery ventilator, right? I guess the other part of it
Yeah,
is if it's cold outside, it's not bringing in cold air. It's trying to sort of sort the air out, so to speak.
correct. Yeah, so for
Yeah.
the people that don't know what that is, if you can imagine, the it is this thing, it's basically like a honeycomb filter, and the air that's kind of being sent out of the building, let's say in the winter, the warm air in the building is getting sent out, is heating the incoming cold air. So these two streams of air don't like touch.
Hmm.
They kind of go into their own independent channels, but the heat transfers between them.
Mm,
So they're supposed to be about like 80% efficient.
yeah.
So if it's like freezing cold outside, you're not just wasting your warm inside
Yeah.
air.
Yeah.
It's being used to kind of like recover some of that, the heat recovery
Yes,
ventilator.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that is an applicable thing for, the average hobbyist. They're not particularly expensive for a home-based unit that does a lot of
Thousand
exchange,
bucks.
actually. Yeah, I think there's even ones that are $500 that can do a room that you might have a reef tank in. And
Because
it's a pretty
they're just
simple
two
thing.
fans.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They're really just two fans, and then just the geometry of the device itself.
Yeah, so definitely something to consider if, someone has pH issues in their tank, especially if it's a system that has pH issues due to the fact that it's in, say, a living room and you have a family of seven and, four dogs and a lot of things breathing CO2 out, is going to contribute, right?
Everybody talks about how like they're shocked at what effect people and pets have on the CO2 levels indoors. I guess it's incredibly impactful.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I think anything you can do to like freshen that up is going to be helpful if you have like, depressed pH.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a customer come and visit sometime last year, and he's like, yeah, I'm just gonna bring a couple friends with me from coming over from Vancouver, and he shows up with like five other guys, and like my pH was just like like I could just see it on the graph. It was just like cracked all the windows after, but it was like, holy crap, like that is significant, the difference it makes.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, so cool. Heat recovery ventilator. I got to get on it. It's probably the next. It's not even a big purchase. I don't know why I'm putting it off, but
The only downside is that like I don't know what your weather is like in like the summer, for example. But here we have very like humid, muggy summers. And it really does bring in a lot of humidity.
yeah,
And that humidity now has to get extracted in the form of dehumidifiers, which is, it's just another thing. But otherwise, like we would be sitting in like 70-degree or 70% relative humidity, which is
yeah,
both kind of gross feeling and also is going to cause mold issues.
yeah,
So that
yeah,
is something to keep in mind also because you have a giant aquarium probably. If you're
yeah,
considering
yeah. Oh,
HRVs, you probably have a big aquarium.
yeah, totally. Well, yeah, and I'm running air conditioning in the room too, so like obviously you're kind of working against the air conditioner a little bit in a way by bringing in new air, but it's I think it's probably worth a try. For my setup, and yeah, I'm kind of close to Seattle, Washington. If it can gives you an idea of weather here, so it's I don't know, it's coastal. I don't know. I wouldn't say it gets particularly humid, but it's it's a garage full of reef tanks, so it's already humid, guaranteed. Yeah. All right. Well, I won't keep you too much longer, but let's go through these rapid fire questions because
Okay.
I think it would be fun, some of these specifically, to ask you. So yes, and it's just silly, basic questions, but it's always kind of fun to see what people say. So we'll go through favorites first here. So if you could pick a favorite fish. Oh, actually, give me two. Give me a favorite fish for visual or personality, and then give me a favorite fish for utilitarian purposes.
Okay, so the utilitarian one is definitely going to be a copper band butterfly.
Hmm.
Obviously, aptasia control. Uh, I actually like their personality a lot too, but I will give you a different fish for
You can
personality.
go personality and you can go look. You can give me three if you want.
Um, what fish do I actually like the look of?
Copper bands are pretty cool.
Yeah. It's like it just occurred to me how little I care about fish. Um, I always like the look of emperor angels,
Yeah.
both the juvenile and the adult emperor angel. But of the fish that I actually have, probably chevron tang.
Yeah.
A juvenile chevron
Juvenile
tang looks really
chevrons,
cool.
really cool. Totally. I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you have one for personality, would you say?
Oh, personality. It's definitely still copper band.
Yeah.
But you know what I just got recently is an Australian stripey.
Mm.
Oh wait, yeah, those were pretty cool.
And those also
But wait,
eat Aptasia,
personality.
right?
Yeah, supposedly.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Maybe other things too.
Oh, another personality fish. Flamingi tang.
Yeah.
Those are like puppy dogs.
Oh yeah. Totally. Totally. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Go to the corals. So favorite
Okay.
SPS. Would you be able to pick a favorite SPS? It could be species too. You don't have to be like super specific on a trade name or whatever.
I'll give you a specific one. I really like the Walt Disney Acroporetennius.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just like the yellow. Like it's just this bright, bright yellow acro that it stands out from a distance.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of like the really intricately patterned tenuises that are all the rage don't look good from across the room.
Yeah, that's a good
Whereas
point.
like a Walt Disney tends to.
It does, yeah, just like glowing yellow, orange kind of colors, and yeah,
Hmm.
because some of those tenuous are more photograph corals than they are, yeah, across
Colony
reef.
corals.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. LPS.
So the LPS, I usually fixate on what I'm struggling with at any given time.
Hmm.
So for a while there, I was struggling mightily with micromucilords. But since we had talked earlier about how that kind of just got rectified once I gave them its own space. Right now, the thing that's tricky for me are some of like the really high-end glitter type Gonioporas.
Hmm.
Those are unhappy in my systems right now.
Okay. So, but by saying they're a favorite, it's kind of that it's also you're up for the challenge right now to kind of improve
Yeah,
them.
that it's the puzzle that I'm spending all of my attention on.
Yeah.
So it's like I'm always looking at those corals and stuff. It's like, I'll be happy if I solve this problem.
Yeah. And Gonnies are just awesome. I mean, I would say as far as LPS,
Yeah.
they would be in my top one or two of choices. So, yeah,
Mhm.
that's fair. Okay. Softies.
So we have a type of, I think it's a Nephthia.
Mm.
It's the Koji Wada Nephthia, and that is my favorite soft coral because it looks like a Dendronephthia. You know how it has these almost shiny spicules as a part of its body,
Hmm. Hmm.
but unlike the Dendronephtheas and the Scleronephtheas and stuff like that, this thing is photosynthetic and it can be like grown long term
Hmm.
and it doesn't just fall apart and die because it doesn't have some obscure feeding regimen. So it kind of has that aesthetic of these non-photosynthetic soft corals that are impossible to keep, but it is easy to keep.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
that would have to be it.
That's cool. Yeah. Right on. Okay. Light. You can say a source or a product that you would sort of say is just overall sort of favorite aquarium light.
Okay, so I am about as lukewarm on lights as it gets. I'm super not evangelical when it
Yeah, we
comes to
kind of
any
went
lighting
there a little
brand.
bit. Yeah.
However, the Ecotech Radion is still my favorite light. And for one reason and one reason alone, the controllability, as goofy as people have issues with Mobius and everything like that, I get it. But being able to very quickly and easily change the light setting on an array of like 20 lights all at once, really nice. Also, the moonlight feature is so legit that the
Hmm.
people that are doing coral spawning and stuff can dial it down to the day because of the effectiveness of Radion moonlight programming.
Yeah.
And once we turn that feature on, our hammers, torches, and frog spawn immediately started breeding.
Really
And we
crazy.
have babies everywhere now.
That's
It's
really
like
cool.
that is a real deal feature for those
Yeah,
lights.
that's interesting too. Actually, I believe when I talked to Jamie Craggs, his initial moonlight schedule that he developed was actually what Radeon took and then applied to
Hmm.
theirs. So it's tested and proven method. So
Oh, it's real.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah, that's cool. I can't remember. I think mine are on. I don't know. I haven't seen torches spawning before. I see lots of acro spawns, and now I don't even talk about it anymore. I see it so often. So I had
Oh,
like
nice.
a couple in the last couple weeks. So sometimes I'm just trying to figure out which coral is actually doing it, and sometimes it's two completely different species in the same day, and you just wonder what sort of made them decide to, I'll have an Aussie coral doing it and an Indo coral, So I don't know how the schedule works out, but it could be more of I don't know, temperature changes and stuff like that that trigger them.
Could be interesting.
Yeah, but we won't go
That's
down
very
that road
cool.
too much. Yeah, it happens a lot. I've never seen settlement, but that's the hard part, as Jamie says. The easy part is getting them
Yeah.
to spawn.
So if you're into the LPS, hammers, torches, and frog spawn,
Yeah.
the settlement part is kind of easier because they're brooders.
Hmm.
So the stuff that they're eventually releasing, they're like fully formed larvae that can swim and attach.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's kind of like why I get decent settlement from that. I think that all the other stuff, like the acros and some of the other LPS, like the scolies and acanthophilia, way more
Yeah,
difficult.
yeah, yeah, and that's why Polypora domicornis, I believe, is one that we see settling in our systems often because it's also a brooder. So
That
yeah,
would make a
yeah,
lot of sense.
yeah, yeah. So people used to for years they called it polyp bailout, but actually what Jamie
Right.
figured out is that it's actually they're just a brooder and they're
Spawning.
just pretty good
Yeah.
at settling. So yeah, okay. If you were to choose one product line for water chemistry, what product line would you use? Nobody's paying you for this,
Oh.
so
Uh, okay, so sorry, we have to clarify. For like supplementation?
yeah. So say a product line like Red Sea or Fauna Marine or
Okay, so I will, oh damn.
It's a tough question
Um,
because I like
it, it
stuff from different companies. So
yeah, yeah. So even though I currently don't use their product, um, I'm always going to be a fan of ESV.
yeah,
Like I've always really liked Bionic.
Bionic is
So
awesome. Yeah.
yeah, and the reason why we don't is I don't know if it really makes sense to do it on a commercial scale.
It would be so expensive. Even
Exactly.
if you work something out with Bob, where he's like, okay, we'll send you giant like 60-gallon barrels instead of it's still
Yeah.
probably tough to make it economical.
I have seen some rockin' reef tanks, and that's all they did was
Yeah,
like it was ESV Bionic.
totally. Yeah, yeah. So no, I think ESV is a great answer. Yeah, I mean, we talked about salt a little, but if out of your experience with probably trying some different salts, I mean, I know you're on Reef Crystals. Would you say there's one in particular you think is maybe one of the better ones?
Here's a little secret. I don't think I've ever used a very good salt. I think I've
Okay.
used like really bad salts, and so the pinnacle of my salt experience is probably reef
Yeah,
crystals.
yeah. Okay, that's fair. Well, and the fact that you're concocting your own trace element, mixtures is kind
Yeah.
of, I don't know, you're finding a way to doctor it the way you need it. So that's fine. We can leave it at Reef Crystals. That's what you're using. So
Hmm.
yeah. Okay, let's see if I want to ask all these other ones. As far as like, I mean, you probably have some more slightly industrial grade, but as far as wave generators, wave pumps, like what would you kind of say you like the most?
Sorry, I have to shout out my absolute favorite pump. They are it's a biz.
Yeah.
They really okay. They are 10 times better than the next.
Yeah.
It's like the price tag is 10 times more. Is
Yeah.
it 10 times better? Yeah, it probably
Yeah.
is. Um, the AFC 150 is an awesome powerhead. Like absolutely spectacular powerhead.
What size of system can you use that in? Like, do you know
I
the
would say that if you don't have a tank that's at least 8 to 10 feet, it's too small.
hmm
Like it is meant for 10 feet to 30 feet
hmm
long.
Yeah.
Like it'll send it.
Yeah.
But the level of control and the cool stuff you can do with it, like you can make like harmonic waves really easily out of the box with that thing
Hmm.
because of how controllable it is. Because you can do it to 1/10 of a percentage power and also to like the millisecond frequency. So you can dial in perfect back and forth.
Wow.
It's a super cool
Yeah,
product.
that's
Yeah.
cool. Yeah. I mean, you're allowed to say that. I mean,
Yeah.
some people at a certain level will start going to the Abyss stuff and it's yeah, we know it's awesome. It's
Yeah.
that's fair. But if you were
It's
gonna
the
say,
real deal.
and the other thing is like for me, like I would say MP40 or a max spec gyre, but to me it all depends on the application. It depends on what the shape of the tank is and what you're trying to do because I think that gyres are great for a flatter, shallower system, but
I agree.
MP40s are great for a deeper system, and they also have a lot of undertow, so they do a lot more than what you kind of see, I think.
Mm.
Yeah.
If I had to pick a more budget friendly pump, and this is also going to the I don't really use this product, but I would like to in the future. I like what I see from Tunza a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because I actually met the owner fairly recently here in the Netherlands, and I came away very impressed with him and the new direction of his product offering. So I'm like,
Yeah.
I kind of written off the brand for like ages, and then now I think I might start reincorporating some of those back into the
Yeah,
into
and
the
the
smaller
funny
tanks.
thing is the oldest pumps I have that I still trust and feel really good about are old Tunzi or Tuns, however you say it. They're old
Yeah,
Tunzi pumps, like, and they're just rock solid. I feel like the encasing of the magnetic part inside is just really well thought out in terms of longevity, and they just keep working.
yeah. And the thing is, like the brand itself kind of has gone through its ups and downs because it's a third generation company that's
Hmm.
owned by the same family.
Hmm.
So you're gonna have like these like fluctuations over literally 3 generations, like almost like 100 years practically.
Yeah.
But and so like the latest owner, younger guy, kind of hungry, and
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Cool. Yeah. Ambitious. getting some new ideas out there. Well, that's a company to watch then. I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Not sponsored.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah, no sponsors. Okay, I'll ask you the big question because I mean,
Okay.
you already have kind of a little bit of a dream setup in terms of your farm, but if you were to sort of have the means to have, your own, epic sort of home aquarium, all compared to Polo Reef, and I'm sure you probably visited Polo Reef before.
Uh-huh. I've been there a couple of times. Yeah.
Yeah. What would you do, and what would you do differently? Like how would you kind of have your dream reef tank?
That is not a rapid fire question.
No, they never are.
Okay. So the thing about Polo Reef that's kind of that makes it like this interesting thing, right? Is that it started off as what amounts to a somewhat small public aquarium sized thing, but it was kind of made with a lot of like hobby stuff. And these are two worlds that like literally do not mix. The stuff that works in public aquarium land is completely different than what works at the hobbyist level. And there are entirely different trade shows. Like, for example, the two trade shows, if you want to make a tank of that size to go to, one is called Raw Regional Aquatics Workshop. And then the other one is called Also, which is like a life support systems conference. Okay. That's where the big tank people go.
Yeah.
And the sort of topics and the sort of like workshops that they have, completely different than anything home aquarium related, right?
Yeah.
So if I was to ever do like a big fish tank system like that, my thing chiefly would be to make it ultra, ultra, ultra easy for myself to maintain. And so like the first thing I would do, I would go to those professional conferences, talk to like public aquarium designers and stuff. And I'll be like, okay, like let's make this so that like the shower is located above the tank. So when I climb out of said aquarium, I can hop into the shower.
Yeah.
Like that sort of stuff is what excites me about a build like that. So I think I was talking to Raj, who owns MRC.
Yeah.
And he's doing like a lot of like the filtration work, trying to like, to help Andrew out. And he does like big public aquarium projects too. But the first thing that I was like saying, you know what? Every now and again, I do this like little mental exercise of like, if I was to do a big aquarium like that, what would I do? And I was like, the first thing is like the least sexy thing ever is I want a freight elevator. Like I want to be able to take a Ford F-150 sized thing from like street level down to my sump level.
Yeah.
Like just I'm all about infrastructure.
Yeah.
Like how do I make my life easier?
Yeah, and the other part of this question I forgot to mention is that you have unlimited budget pretty much. Like your money is really not a concern. So, but yeah.
Once you're at that size, you have no choice.
Yeah.
Like literally everything is going to cost an astronomical sum of money. Like there's no way around it.
Yeah.
Like I would argue a 10-foot tank is going to be astronomically expensive. Once you go past that, it's like literally cost no object land in a hurry.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, like if you were to ever sort of walk away from coral farming, like, I don't know, it doesn't really feel like work for me a lot of the time. It's pretty enjoyable, but if you were, if you were to say sort of choose a setup for yourself, do you have like a size or dimensions in mind, like something that you think you would be happy with?
Yeah, I would say that something in the neighborhood of like 100 gallons. 100, like,
Yeah.
So people often ask like, because I had visited some of these larger aquariums. They're like, did you come away from that experience wanting one for yourself? And I'm like, absolutely not. Like my desire went the other direction. Like I have a couple of 600-gallon show tanks. I hate them. Like I hate the idea of having to maintain those. Like people that have never had like a 500-gallon plus display have no idea how difficult they are to maintain. Like the difference between a 300 and 500-gallon tank, different animals altogether, completely different.
Yeah.
So yeah, so my interest and desire went like way down. It's like I want a much smaller aquarium because I can handle that.
Yeah.
Like recently, we just had a fish in one of these tanks decide, oh no, today's the day I'm gonna murder that other one. And it just like it was dead set from like sun up to sundown is trying to murder this other fish. Like I can't have that. Yeah, exactly.
What the guy said.
But it's like no, we have to now go in a heavily stocked, dense SPS display.
Yeah.
To try to catch fish.
Yeah.
Brutal.
Yeah.
Brutal. We basically had to drain like 90% of the water out.
Crazy.
And then try to catch stuff, right?
So
these things in bigger tanks, it's not a fun experience.
Yeah. And even if you can pay people to do it, I think for you it seems like your retirement tank is just like a really nice reef tank that you can put your hands in and grab something if it falls down and manage it on your own. Yeah. Because that's part of the fun of it.
I want my life to be easier.
Yeah, totally. Cool, man. Okay, well, yeah, I think we got through the rapid fires pretty fast there. That's fine. Well, nice. Thanks a lot for making the time, and I'd definitely like to chat with you again. And hopefully one day I don't know what else I do in Ohio, but if I come to Ohio, I'll definitely pop by and visit.
It will be a surprisingly good time.
Yeah. Okay.
I can show you a lot of like really, really cool reef related things, some hidden gems.
Okay, that's cool. Right on. Is there anything else you want to mention right now or plug or anything like that? I know you have your own podcast and maybe you have stuff coming up or...
Yeah. Buy coral from me.
Yeah. Okay.
No. It's like I actually have a coral farm where I sell corals. You should check it out. It's called Tidal Gardens.
Yeah. Go to tidalgardens.com. All right, cool, man. Well, this is enjoyable. And thanks again for making the time.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, cheers, man. Okay, have a good one. Thanks for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did with Thein from Tidal Gardens. And if you're in the US, you should probably buy some corals from Thein, as we discussed, and go to tidalgardens.com. Also, make sure to check out his YouTube at Tidal Gardens. Tons of amazing content. Also, his own podcast, where he talks to a lot of really rad guests. Some I'm a little envious to talk to myself. I'd like to say thanks to our sponsor, Fauna Marine, always bringing us great, consistent products out of Germany, and I am so happy to have them on board with this podcast. I am a regular user of their ICPs, and if you are looking for consulting for your ICP, you can select me as an advisor. However, if you want to book a session with me, you have to do it through my Patreon at patreon.com/Beyond the Reef podcast. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Please leave a like, comment, subscribe, and let us know what you think. If you have any suggestions for future guests, feel free to reach out. Take care.